All right, well, I'm here at the Fredericktown Board of Education office, Fredericktown, Ohio. This is the Knox Weekly Podcast. I'm Grant Pepper, and I'm talking to Will Hartley this week, the newly appointed coach of the Fredericktown Freddies football program. Coach Hartley, thank you for being with me this week.
No problem. Thanks for coming up.
So we'll talk a little about, how you got here and your history with the program before. I know you were here for 16 years as a coach, assistant and then head coach before, and then why you kind of wanted to return and how you found your way back to the helm here. And I guess to start, so you were. It was announced that you're going to be appointed the coach last week, I think, a week ago today.
Yeah.
You started here. Let's see. So it'd be 18 years ago now, I guess would have been the first year.
Yeah, this is my 18th year.
Yeah, and so walk me through how you got to Fredericktown, I guess, initially.
Well, actually, you got to go back to 2002, and a high school friend of mine, really close friend of mine, Luke Beal, was the head coach at that time. They had a couple guys from the social studies department that were longtime coaches and social studies teachers, and they were retiring. And I'd actually just been riffed up in a job that I had up in Northeast Ohio outside of Cleveland.
What were you doing there?
I was teaching and coaching up there, yeah.
Okay.
Just getting started.
Yeah.
And he called me, and he had a spot on his coaching staff, and they had that the teaching opening as well, and we had gone to high school together at Clear Fork, so was from this area and had roots in this area. So the rest is history, as they say, and 18 years later, still here.
Have you always been a social studies teacher here? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, always said. I started at the middle school.
Okay.
And then gravitated towards the high school. And, for the most part, I've had freshmen and sophomores for world and U.S. history for several years.
And so you were an assistant coach D coordinator for a long time.
Yeah,
right?
I was Coach Beal's defensive coordinator all the way up through 2009.
Uh-huh.
And then he left and took the head coaching job at Brunswick, Ohio, which is in Northeast Ohio, bigger school. And then I stayed on with Coach Baum's staff. When Coach Baum was here, we had a really good 5-year run with Coach Baum. I was also DC then. And that went all the way up through 2014. And then I was named the head coach in 15, and I was the head coach until 17. And then I dropped back down. And the last 2 years I spent with the junior high.
So just kind of tell me, obviously you guys had some really good years, like you said, especially from that, 2010 on range until you stepped down, and 2015 stands out as one of those years. So your first year as head coach, 10-3, your conference coach champs, all that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your best memories, I guess, from that season? What made that group special?
Well, it was going into the year, there was a certain amount of uncertainty. We knew we had a lot of kids coming back, but there was a certain amount of uncertainty. We had lost our quarterback, Austin Hathaway, who had been a 3-year starter, and we had been undefeated in 14 and got into the playoffs, and lost a disappointing rematch to Centerburg down at Mount Vernon, which is a great atmosphere, and we just came up short. So there was a little bit of uncertainty as far as we had some key spots we had to fill. And those kids, really great group of seniors, and they really worked very hard through the off season. One of the closest groups I've ever been around, as far as just great teammates for each other. We had a really good regular season, but we had a poor outing against Highland late in the year, and we were up against the wall as far as were we going to make the playoffs or not. And we went into Week 10 having to beat a very good Cardington team, and everything just came together. And we actually fought through some injuries in that game. We had our key running back went down with an injury in that game, and we lost our quarterback in that game as well. Our starting quarterback, Dylan Smith, in that game, and we had a backup come in, Kirk Mans, who was just a great athlete, and was a guy that you could just plug in, and we played a great game against Cardington, won that game, which put us into the playoffs.
As an 8 seed, right?
Yeah, it was a 7 or an 8 seed, but we were on the road anyway, and we had to go down to Fort Fry, south of Zanesville.
A long way away.
Yeah, and we ended up, and we had our backup quarterback in, Kirk Mans. He played a great game. We played really good defense that night. Austin Geiger had a great night as a fullback,
Mm-hmm.
and we were able to upset them. And then we had in the second round we played a really tough Paint Valley team and beat them on a 2-point conversion, and ended up going to the regional semifinals before we bowed out against Grandview Heights, which they were solid squad that year. So it was it was just a really exciting year. The playoff run was definitely the playoff run, starting with that last regular season game against Cardington where we really had to win, so it was kind of a playoff situation all the way through the Fort Fry game and the Paint Valley game. It was very memorable for everybody that was part of it.
And if I recall, when you guys beat Fort Fry, I think it was 13-0. I think might have been the score. So as a defensive guy, and obviously this was your head coach at this point,
Mm-hmm.
but having built that program with your vision defensively, that had to be a great feeling, right?
Yeah, it was. It was a great defensive outing that night, and the Fort Fry offense was a pretty explosive offensive team,
Mm-hmm.
and they had put up a lot of big numbers down in the league that they play. So, yeah, to come out of there with a shutout was it was really a feather in the hat of that defensive team.
Yeah, and then obviously, so you're hired in 15 as the head coach. You stay for 3 seasons, 19-14 record, and then you decide in 2017 to kind of step down. Just kind of walk me through why at that time you wanted to step down. You said coach junior high football, is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, I coach junior high. My son's he's in junior high right now, so I had an opportunity to coach him and the kids that he's kind of come up with, which I've seen since they were in 3rd grade, so pretty close to them, and quite a few of the parents in that group. So that was a really good opportunity. I just needed a break. They always talk about getting burned out and having to recharge batteries and things of that nature. And I thought maybe it was time. We were starting to struggle a little bit with numbers going down and things of that nature in 17 and in 16 and 17.
Yeah.
So maybe it was time for some new energy and a new way of looking at things. I had carried on a lot of the things that Coach Beal had done and Coach Baum had done. So we had a lot of consistency and maybe it was time for kind of a new idea, for new ideas coming in from the outside to maybe re-energize the program a little bit and maybe get the numbers back up to what they had been, prior to from 2015 and back.
So I'm assuming you're still watching the team play and things like that in the 2 years since, and
yeah, right, yeah. I did, and this past year I did some some stats and things for Coach Wolford and stuff. So yeah, I still try to be pretty active with the program.
And when Fredericktown announced it's looking for a head coach, what made you say I want to get back into it?
Well, Coach Bellman approached me, and he really, really encouraged me to think about coming back, and we had a tremendous amount of dialogue and conversation. Also, Mr. Gary, who's our new principal this year, and they both really encouraged me and said that this was really the best thing. The best fit for myself and the program moving forward, and where we're at right now, that we needed to, have somebody that had some stability, knew the culture of the program and the kids, and that they really felt that I was the person to step in there, and kind of bring that, start the process of building on the past tradition and getting the kids excited about playing football again.
Yeah. And you mentioned the numbers, and obviously, last year, you look at Fredericktown's roster specifically, 29 kids on the team, 14 of them were freshmen. So one of the youngest teams in the area, in the conference. A lot of teams struggle with numbers these days, especially in high school football. And so what's it like trying to stare down that challenge, and how do you plan on kind of addressing that, I guess?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. We've got at least 14 boys committed from the freshman group that's going to be sophomores. So that's good. We got a good core group of kids, and then the same thing with the upperclassmen. There's a good core of kids, but it's just really just kind of attracting those fringe kids.
Yeah.
We'd like to get some more of the multi-sport athletes out. That's also been, if you look at somebody like an Austin Hathaway, that's an individual. Those are the types of athletes that we could hang our hat on as far as the program was concerned, and they were always 3-sport athletes. So that's been pretty consistent, and we've lost that a little bit. So we'd like to start getting those kids that are playing 2 sports to also get them to commit to playing football. That would be great. And then we also have a lot of kids in the hallways that are just choosing, not to be involved in any of the extracurriculars. And we want to try and encourage them and get their peers involved, encouraging them and just try and get them interested and motivated enough to come out. Usually if you can get somebody to make the commitment and come out, they usually say, hey, that was, I'm glad that you did that. I'm glad that you encouraged me or pushed me to come out. So it's really just getting them, into the weight room, getting them committed in the summer and getting them to camp in the fall. And if we can do that, it seems like the rest takes care of itself. But that's, it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And it is, that's the number one challenge right now. And that's going to be my message really to everybody is, before we start thinking about winning football games and becoming competitive again, we got to get the numbers up. We just have to have more kids involved.
Yeah. And I would imagine, in all honesty, I would imagine it's harder, especially in high school sports. College sports is kind of like this, but especially in high school, when you're losing games, it's probably harder to recruit young men to come play. And especially when you've had a couple of years of that. How would you describe that challenge as a coach? Obviously you're a teacher here, so everyone knows you, which probably helps. And so, when you're winning, like a Lucas, let's say, right now, I'm sure they don't have problems, convincing kids to come out. How would you describe that challenge here right now at Fredericktown?
Well, I think you just have to point back to the reality that in a public school setting, there's peaks and there's valleys.
Right.
And you have these periods of great success, but invariably you're not going to be able to sustain that. There's very few programs. There are programs in the state that are able to do that. But if you look at the history of Fredericktown, it's been these peaks and valleys. Mm-hmm. So we just got to make sure that the kids see the big picture and they don't just dwell on the short term that, we're not very good right now. And we also, we really have to encourage the kids in the lower grades, because if you look at the lower grades, especially like our Pee Wee numbers, not so much our junior high, but our Pee Wee numbers, we have a lot of kids going out at that age, and they're having fun, and they're having a little bit of success. We had a pretty successful 5th and 6th grade group, but the key is keeping them engaged and keeping them interested and keeping that dialogue open with those kids, with the parents and with the coaches down there, and just trying to move them along. And I think that's something over the years maybe we've taken for granted, but we haven't always kept that link open, and we've lost kids in the shuffle, for one reason or another. There's a lot more opportunities for, I think you said that this is not something that's unique to Fredericktown, and there's just more outlets and opportunities for kids, whether it's club ball and things like that, for them to get involved. So you're competing against all these other factors and variables, and it is challenging, but I think you just got to give them that message, that consistent message that, if you stick with it from one year to the next and you really buy in, that at some point, you're going to start to see those successes take place, whether it's short-term successes, wins from one week to the next, or whether it's long-term successes, building the growth, the health and the stability of the program.
Right. So just from a X's and O's, kind of a philosophical standpoint, I guess, on your end, how would you kind of characterize, you're a defensive coordinator for a long time. Would you kind of say that's one of your strengths? One of your focuses as a head coach is the defensive end, or how would you characterize how you coach, I guess? Yeah,
I've always, much more, got a lot more experience and comfortable on the defensive side of the ball. We've been running the same defense here for many, many years, and even, since I have not been the head coach this past year, they ran the stack, and Coach Kevin Barry was DC. He was a longtime assistant and played in the program. And he's probably going to continue in that same role. And I think I'm going to transition and spend a little bit more time on the offensive side of the ball. It's kind of a new challenge, and I think that if you just look at the dynamics of the staff, it's probably the best fit for me right now. And offensively, we're going to do a lot of the same stuff that we've done. We've always been we've always been flexible. Our core stuff's going to come out of the I formation with a great deal of misdirection, some kind of wing T concepts within the I formation. But then we've also been flexible enough. We use the same terminology, but we can switch in and out of the I into the spread, and it lends itself to where you can kind of fit your offensive scheme around your kids from one year to the next. Like sometimes from one year to the next, you might have a kid that is really a versatile runner and he's a dual threat guy. Well, you're going to be more spread, and then you might have a really talented backfield and maybe a big offensive line, and then you can get into the I. But it's all the same terminology, so you can kind of switch in and out relatively easy. So we're trying, reinstall that kind of flexible approach to our offense and hang our hat on that traditional 3-3 stack defense that we've, the kids are pretty comfortable with that, and also the coaching staff is comfortable with that.
Yeah, with the I offense especially. I mean, since we were talking recruiting and things like that, a lot of college teams now, a lot of pro teams throw the ball a lot. So kids are watching these guys on TV throw the ball. Yeah. And so as a coach, just kind of, what's your pitch, I guess, and not that you need to pitch, you're the coach, but when you see maybe kids who aren't interested in playing that kind of offense, I mean, there's a reason you're doing it. So why is that kind of an approach the one that you've kind of chosen to take, I guess, as head coach?
You're saying focus on the I formation.
Yeah.
I mean, at our level in our league, you got to be able to run the football.
Right.
I mean, that's the key. So running the football has got to be the first priority, and then off of that, and then you can incorporate your quick passing game and your play action and your boots and things of that nature. So I mean, you're wanting to establish the run, but hopefully, I mean, the ultimate goal is to be balanced in everything that you do, and spread the ball around and get a lot of kids involved in a lot of touches. I mean, that's successful teams are able to do that.
Right.
But the number one thing we got to do, from day one is learn to be physical at the point of attack and start running the football, and then everything else builds off of that.
Yeah, and you said you've already started your off-season program, right? So you guys are doing that right now. And from a cultural standpoint, what are some things that you think are most neat or most important to you as a coach in your program?
Yeah, I mean, the two or three things that I would say is, we've already touched on. We got to start building numbers again. Right. We got to dip back into the tradition of Fredericktown football. Yeah, we've had peaks and valleys, but we've always been competitive. For the most part, we've been competitive, and we want to sell that message to the kids that, hey, we got to get ourselves in a situation. We got to commit to the point where we can be competitive from one week to the next. So those two things. Our team strength, we got to improve our team strength, which that starts with more kids committing to the off-season program. I mean, we're right now, and Coach Barry, even before I came back, Coach Barry was running the off-season program here in the interim when we didn't have a head coach since just after Thanksgiving. And we've been averaging between 15 and 20 kids. We'd like to get that up to about between 20 and 25 kids. So it's numbers and it's commitment and just day-to-day working on that team strength and agility and quickness and those types of things, which in the short term, if we get more kids bought in and they're coming up to the weight room on a more regular basis, then in the long term, that's going to help them as individuals, but it's also going to help them as individuals with their strength and their speed, but that also multiplies and it helps the entire team. So I think building the numbers and working on the team strength and kind of getting the kids to buy in to that concept that, hey, we might be down right now, but let's all work together, and we should all recommit ourselves to getting back to a point where we're competitive from one week to the next.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you want to meet Coach Hartley, Mr. Nate Bellman at Fredericktown's organized a Meet the Coach night, right? So that's going to be next Thursday, January 30th, 7 p.m., open in the community, High School Commons. So if you want to meet Coach Hartley, you can meet him there. Thanks, Coach, for joining me on this podcast.
Hey, no problem. As I said, thanks for coming up and thanks for the coverage.